You've probably seen it pass many times on the internet. The French are dragging themselves a reputation for being cowardly, particularly in the Anglo-Saxon world, and by extension in the minds of a much larger audience. This is despite a history that doesn't initially seem conducive to it. But why is this so? Is it justified? We'll see in a few minutes. This cliché of the cowardly Frenchman originates from the country's recent history, particularly the Second World War. But why the French, whose defeat in the Battle of France in 1940? These products aside, are other peoples such as the British, Belgians, or even the Poles so much the target of these jokes and mockeries? Several reasons contribute to this, largely stemming from English-speaking countries such as the United States and Great Britain, collectively known as the Anglo-Saxon world. First of all, it should be known that before the Second World War, the Americans held the French in high esteem for various historical reasons, particularly the American War of Independence, for which France was essential along with Spain, as well as following the First World Conflict, from which France emerged victorious. And it made the French infantry sometimes presented abroad as the Queen of Battles, that is to say, the Queen of Battles, as we can hear, for example, in a period report. In the early 1930s, the French army was regarded as the world's premier land army, a status it no longer held, in September 1939 when World War II broke out. But the Germans do not attack immediately. It is only on May 10, 1940, that Nazi Germany launches its invasion of the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and France. Luxembourg falls the same day, and the Netherlands surrenders 4 days later. Over the next few days, the Germans press on, helped by Allied blunders and hesitancy. This causes the British to pull back to Dunkirk without consulting their allies, which is followed by a disastrous evacuation of the latter, carried out from May 26th. 2 days later, the Belgians surrendered after a chaotic and fierce fight. 18 days into the German operation, France remains the sole country fully engaged in battle. Despite the fact that a crucial part of its army is simply trapped with the British in Dunkirk, for the French, it doesn't look good at all. And despite various attempts to slow down the German advance in order to form a coherent front, hoping at least to stabilize the situation, Paris falls 2 weeks later, making the situation clear. The Battle of France of 1940 is lost. The 16th of June, Paul Reynaud, the head of the French government and president of the council, wanted to continue the war outside of France. However, he lost the political battle against his vice president, Philippe Pétain, who supported an armistice that would withdraw France from the conflict. Consequently, Reynaud resigns, and Pétain becomes the new French government leader. The next day, Pétain asked the population in the army to stop fighting through a radio message. The fate of metropolitan France and its army is sealed. The fight is over, in theory at least. Notably, 3/4 of the French prisoners captured during this campaign were taken only after and due to this announcement. At the end of the week, on June 22nd, France officially acknowledges defeat and signs the armistice with Germany, as desired by Pétain and his supporters. In a matter of just 1 month and 2 weeks, the Germans, with belated assistance from the Italians, have decisively defeated the Allies. And do they plan to eject France from the war? It's a victory through chaos. That's where the stereotype of the cowardly French will originate. This defeat is not just military, and, as you may have already understood on the ground, the French, though clearly defeated, only give up once they are abandoned by their government. Not everyone does it right away, even in this situation. General Alphonse Georges protests until June 22nd, the signing day, when he sends a telegram. The measures prescribed by the government are incompatible with the need to prolong resistance. General Hollery also disobeys government orders, doing everything to slow the Germans on his northern flank and the Italians he faces. Nevertheless, the Pétain government's stance dominated politically, backed by much of the nation's military and political elite. But on the ground, it's a different story. What needs to be remembered is that an armistice is a fully political act, where the forces present find an agreement to end the fighting. This armistice, a shock in France, as I mentioned, is equally so abroad. This is especially true given the collaboration of part of the country, represented by the Vichy-based French state. These events profoundly impact public opinion in various nations. especially in the United States, including its political class. This will impact what follows. In 1940, a small Gallic village continues to resist the invaders amid the ongoing global conflict. During this period, France is represented by two entities, the French state of Pétain, collaborating with the fascist states in Free France, continuing the fight alongside the Allies from part of the French colonial empire under the leadership of General Charles de Gaulle. Free France gradually establishes itself in Allied military and diplomatic operations, with the goal of restoring France to its status as a great nation after the war. But this created tensions with the United States, who believed that France, having partly collaborated with the fascist enemy, was clinging to an undeserved status in their view. The firm and independent positions of General de Gaulle towards the United States during and after the Second World War, sometimes perceived as ingratitude, further strained the situation. In 1966, de Gaulle expelled American bases from French soil, demonstrating this point well. After World War II, France's reputation among Anglo-Saxon Americans declined significantly, and this lack of affection seems to be mutual. That's when the idea begins to spread, slowly but surely. The idea that if France was defeated and part of the country collaborated, it's because the French deep down are not reliable people and are cowards. After the war and until the 80s, this perspective is regularly slipped into the works of some British and American historians. But it's not just there that this image has taken root. The notion of a less capable and motivated French army has persisted in France for various reasons, despite efforts to dispel this image. First of all, the observations of civilians during the painful weeks of May-June 1940 played an important role. Few French civilians witnessed the battles, but many saw demoralized troops in sometimes chaotic retreats, harassed by a faster German army with air superiority. This is compounded by the justifications and even lies from some of the French political and military elite, blaming the troops' men for the defeat, absolving themselves of responsibility. Lastly, Vichy's collaborationist propaganda justified its policy and the new order it sought to establish in France using similar arguments. But if even some French people believe this, doesn't it hold at least a grain of truth? Did our ancestors not lack vigor in combat? And then let's say it of courage. History provides a clear answer to this subject. No, the French of 1940 were not cowards, on the contrary. It's not for nothing that the German General Walter von Reichenau said in June 1940, "The French troops fought like lions." The number of French combat deaths exemplifies the intensity of France's commitment against Germany's army. On this campaign, called the Battle of France, which was brief, lasting only 6 weeks, the French army counted, according to sources, between 50 and 92,000 deaths. These ranks represented up to 90% of the directly engaged forces at various points on the front. Here's an example that clears up a common myth. The German breakthrough, led by no less than 40 German divisions, including 7 of these 10 armored divisions, as well as shock infantry regiments, are facing only 7 supposedly second-rate French divisions, and as a result are under-equipped. You might assume that the French will crumble under the initial fierce attack, paving the way for a breakthrough. Well, no, since apparently during this attack, which is a moment whose details are still debated by historians today, the French are holding up morally well to the particularly violent shock of this attack, until they are logically overwhelmed due to their significant inferiority in number, equipment, and firepower. To give you a revealing example, the 55th Infantry Division, based in Sedan, also under-equipped, finds itself alone, receiving the shock of 960 tanks. Supported by the elite German regiment Grosse Deutschland and several German infantry divisions, all under intense bombardment led by German aviation and artillery. French infantry soldiers hold the line in hellish conditions, suffering heavy casualties, before the Germans eventually cross the Meuse at several points, thus overflowing the French device, creating general confusion in the sector. The German breakthrough was aided by major French tactical errors. This combativeness is found throughout the campaign, whether during the first phase in the North, Netherlands, or Belgium. On the Meuse, as we mentioned, as well as later on the Somme, then later on the Loire, I have many interesting examples to share about the fierce French struggle that we likely don't discuss enough. If you'd like to watch a mini documentary on this topic, comment below to let me know. The French in general, therefore, in this first phase of the war, demonstrated an undeniable sense of courage and sacrifice. Dunkirk is a prime example where the sacrifice of some French troops enabled the British retreat and evacuation of a portion of the French force. Or the tenacity of the Army of the Alps that suddenly halts the advance of an Italian army just entering the war. The French defensive momentum, exemplified by the hedgehog defense tactic, later adopted by other conflict participants, persisted even after the front collapsed. The combativeness leads to a high casualty count, estimated between 123,000 and 250,000, increasing the total daily French losses. The daily casualties, ranging from 4,200 to 8,200 dead and injured, are staggeringly high. The evidence taken together makes it implausible to imagine a widespread lack of motivation among the soldiers, and may even suggest the contrary. So it is still curious that this cliché can, nowadays, still be relevant, although it doesn't stand up to its source material and should have lost momentum by now. So why does it still exist? The answer is much closer to our era in 2003. In 2003, France refuses to join the coalition formed by the United States as part of a military intervention in Iraq and openly opposes the conflict. Following this opposition, the so-called French bashing events break out. This idea is rooted in the minds of some American politicians, resulting from various factors mentioned earlier, popularized by various media and the internet. All of this led to a particularly virulent and aggressive anti-French campaign, largely based on the Americans' perception of the French following the Second World War. Hello, you cheese-eating surrender monkeys? This frenzy then spread to the popular culture of countries culturally close to the United States, explaining, therefore, that even today the French can be treated as cowards. Now that you know why some call the French cowards, despite a historical reality that does not lend itself to it. Have you ever heard of this man who was a real French hero at the time, and without whom de Gaulle probably simply would not have been able to legitimize his authority? If you don't know who it is, I invite you to watch the following video.